Professor Joseph is a professor of history at Tufts University and is the author and editor of several books, including Dark Days, Bright Nights, From Black Power to Barack Obama, and Stokely, A Life, a biography of Stokely Carmichael, available next month. He's also a graduate of Temple University and the founder and director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at Tufts, as well as a leading historian of the Black Power movement. Welcome, Professor Joseph.
Hey, thank you for having me, Peter.
I think a reasonable place to start in our conversation about Black Power is to get a working definition. What is Black Power?
Black Power really relates to the way Stokely Carmichael and other activists articulated it in the 1960s, is really social, political, cultural, economic self-determination on behalf of the African American community. So when we think about this notion of Black Power, it was Black people defining their own politics, Black people defining what identity meant, and also what were the goals, strategies, and tactics to achieve racial equality, economic justice in the United States and abroad.
It's a large agenda.
It's a large agenda. And people had, what's interesting is people had different ways of going about this. So somebody like Stokely Carmichael certainly is a political revolutionary. Although initially he is an advocate of radical democracy. He is working on voter campaigns. He's working with the Democratic Party. He moves away from that and starts his own independent organizing. So you had certain Black Power activists who were advocating class struggle, Marxist-Leninism. You had certain Black Power activists who were saying, let's work within the system and we need more Black faces in higher places. Now they tended to be more conservative and they tended to believe, Richard Nixon in 1969 says he's fine with Black Power as long as it's Black capitalism. Right? So there's definitely different versions of Black Power, but certainly the overall thrust is really for radical social political justice.
The misunderstandings surrounding the Black Power movement, they seems to have sort of two primary sources. I think one is the rhetoric and the style of members of the organization itself. Yeah. And the other could be focused on sort of the shaping and the misshaping of the media of the day and the white establishment.
Yes, activists at times were too hyperbolic. One, it's the historical context. It's a context of race relations in the 1960s and early 70s, much different than right now. So it's a context of demonstrations, but also urban uprisings or what people call riots, police brutality. It's an era of political assassinations. So at times, activists, were both bold and speaking truth to power, but at times they were purposefully inflammatory. The whole idea of, America, if America doesn't come around, it's going to burn to the ground, was designed to provoke and to shock.
Well, certainly it had that effect. I think that it's fair to say that certainly a large part of white America is fearful by the rhetoric. Now, was that to a certain extent intentional insofar as it empowered and made clear to the Black community that yes, we do hold power, even if in the face of police forces, in the face of politics, we don't hold such power.
I think it was designed to tell the truth in the sense of what people wanted to do was boldly speak truth to power. So in this sense, talking about white racism, right? Carmichael and Hamilton in their book Black Power in 1967, they coined the term institutional racism, right? Like we didn't have that in our lexicon. Those were big ideas at the time. This idea of that, it wasn't about personal prejudice, it was about institutional systems and about white privilege, right? That did scare and provoke people, but I think Black Power activists, Black Power radicals felt that Black people were being subjugated and there was racial oppression running rampant anyway, that the civil rights movement hadn't really been as transformative as it needed to be. So this call for Black Power was going to be what finally provided a context and a politics of empowerment.
Most of our history textbooks place Martin Luther King sort of front and center. We are a culture that likes to see one person out in the front. However, certainly your work is suggesting that the Black Power movement more generally not only helped organize the African American community in the 1960s, but really set the foundation for Barack Obama's election in 2008.
What I'll say there is that, and in my book, Dark Days, Bright Nights, I make the argument that it's not just civil rights that transforms the racial landscape and the political landscape of the United States of America. It's also the Black Power movement. And the argument I make is that when we think about Black Power, there are many different iterations of Black Power. So things like Black student unions, for example, the creation of Black studies departments, this all created a landscape that provided more equality, that provided Black elected officials. All these things really owed themselves not just to civil rights, but to the Black Power movement, which was very consciously trying to build this struggle for racial solidarity and get more Black political, social, economic power.
A comment that I think is attributed to Stokely Carmichael, in terms of his feeling that, and I paraphrase, that America will never extend equality to all of its people. What are your comments on that? The sense of hopelessness that America can live up to, hopefully, what its mission is.
Well, yeah, I think that's obviously it's a harsh critique, and I understand why he would say something like that. But I mean, I think those of us who are interested in racial justice, economic justice, we have to be more hopeful even than that. So I mean, part of the reason why you wake up in the morning and you get up to struggle is that there's going to be social, political transformation in the United States. So I think we have to understand sort of the difference between an activist giving sort of a harsh denunciation and really their own hopes and dreams. I think one of the reasons why Carmichael was so critical of American society is because his experience as a civil rights activist, even before he's a Black Power revolutionary, is very, very deep. He's in Mississippi, he's in Alabama. On the day-to-day, he's getting arrested dozens and dozens of times, right? When he does the Black Power speech in 1966, June 16th in Mississippi, he says, this is the 27th time I've been arrested. He's just been released from jail. And this is just for nonviolent civil rights activism, right? So he's been at Howard University doing sit-ins. He's been in Cambridge, Maryland. He's been tear gassed and brutalized by police. So it's very interesting. Those kind of experiences really shape him. And one of the reasons I wrote the book on Stokely is because Stokely is really the only Black Power activist who's a major Black Power figure who had that extensive experience during the heroic period of the civil rights era, right? So he's not just sort of coming out of nowhere and saying this. I mean, he knows who Martin Luther King Jr. is. They're friends. He goes to his house for dinner, and he knew him since 1963. He had met Malcolm X as early as 1961, helped organize Malcolm's visit to Howard University. So this is somebody who knows who Fannie Lou Hamer is. Fannie Lou Hamer is the sharecropper turned activist who's part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and very famously in 1964 does a live address to the nation at the Democratic National Convention, the Credentials Committee, where she's saying, is this America? And talking about being brutalized for trying to vote and organize in Mississippi. And very famously, Lyndon Johnson cuts her off by calling an impromptu press conference in 1964, right? And those were Stokely's people. So his activities are very, very profound in the sense that he was organizing with some of the poorest people on the planet. You talk about African-American sharecroppers in Mississippi and Lowndes County, Alabama. They're living in feudal conditions that are just like so-called third world conditions right here in the United States in the 1960s. These are people who had no birth certificate, would never have a certificate of death. So that's who he was organizing, right? So it's not just sort of urban militants in Harlem or Oakland and things like that.
What can the white community today do to be allies to people in the Black community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think right now what we've had occur in sort of this post-civil rights period, this post-Black Power period, this period of Obama, is that we've seen increased racial stratification in the United States, increased racial segregation, but it's not de facto, it's not de jure segregation, it's not by law, right? It's de facto. Michelle Alexander has a book called The New Jim Crow, and Michelle is a friend of mine, and we brought her to Tufts, and she was talking about new Jim Crow mass incarceration. I extend that metaphor to really our daily lives, where we still have Jim Crow, a rigid system of black, white, separate, and unequal, and there are other ethnicities involved, but they all fall along a continuum of race between those black-white poles. So I think one thing that white citizens of sort of good conscience can do is, one, be informed and find out, like, why is there still racial disparity and institutional racism in the United States, and what's our recent history? But not just our recent history in terms of civil rights, but also things like antebellum slavery. You know, the movie 12 Years a Slave, I've written extensively about that for different publications. And one of the reasons I think that's so profound, it provides us a different, renewed understanding that racial slavery is at the heart of our narrative as a nation, right? So once we come to terms with that, you're in a much better position. And then finally, I mean, this idea, before getting into sort of tactics and nuts and bolts, this idea of white privilege. There is a privilege of being white in a racially stratified society, right? So it doesn't mean that any white person is personally bad or should feel any kind of guilt, but they certainly should understand what the privilege is of having this identity that institutions and other people respond to differently than people who are African American or people who are darker skinned, right? So I think that's part of it. And then it becomes, at the local level, you know, Arlington, I did the keynote for the MLK celebration. It becomes reaching out to other people. I mean, at Tufts we have the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, and we're you know, interested in multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational you know, dialogue and research and intellectual conversation about these issues. So it's saying at the local level, you know, reaching out to groups like that, you know, to try to do some of that work together, because I think that there are a lot of people who want to rethink this idea of racial integration in the 21st century, because they're growing up in a world where, even though there are not black and white signs for water fountains and swimming pools, there might as well be, because the neighborhoods are so racially homogeneous. Schools are, friendship circles are, so blacks and whites are still likely to, you know, live, work, and die apart rather than together.
One of the things that your center considers a mission is expanding the dialogue on race. You, I understand, the center is going to be hosting a dialogue?
Yeah, in September. We hosted one this past September 12th of 2013. We're going to host a second one. We had other schools join us, including Harvard's School of Public Health. We had about 400 people come to Tufts campus. We had different speakers, you know, Asian American, white, African American, and we really had an interactive dialogue with people. And our jumping off point was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. This year it's going to be the 50th anniversary of both the Civil Rights Act, but also War on Poverty, and also Freedom Summer. So there's a lot of 50s this year. And you know, where are we today in conjunction with those times?
Coming out next month, as I said. You've got this, yes. Stokely A Life. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Certainly a compelling read. If there's anything more that would be good for our viewers to know about the Black Power movement, about the work of your center?
I think Stokely really connects to the way in which I look at my work now in terms of the evolution of my work, because I'm very interested in issues of race and democracy at the local, national, and global level. And certainly what Stokely Carmichael was trying to do in the 1960s and the larger civil rights movement, larger Black Power movement, was really transform American democracy, make these democratic institutions work. We all know these institutions aren't perfect. And in the case of civil rights activists, they were willing to go to jail and demonstrate to try to transform those institutions. In the case of Black Power activists, they wanted to demonstrate, sit in, and by any means necessary, fix those institutions. So I think that these ideas of race and democracy are very, very important, and people who are interested in that should, you know, try to connect with the center, try to read, you know, Stokely and these other books, but really think to themselves that part of being an active citizen is really understanding that relationship between race and democracy, and really race, class, and democracy, gender, sexuality in our country.
If you like this interview, I invite you to go to the Arlington Public News website, where you can find Dr. Joseph and many others comment on what Black History Month means to them. And here's hoping that every month can lead us to a rich history that instructs and nourishes us all, regardless of skin color or any other distinction. For Dr. Peniel Joseph, I'm Peter Bermudes for Arlington Public News.